like crazy and try to get over them before they broke, or just stay put and take my beating. I stopped paddling and sat on my board to calm myself before they hit. On the lead wave came, towering, reaching, and finally detonating right in front of me, the worst possible place. I was beyond all human intervention. I took one last breath, slipped off my board, and dove for the bottom. The force was so shocking that I caught myself thinking there must be some mistake. My board leash snapped immediately. Vortices heaved me up, changed their mind, drove me down, somersaulted me, stripped off my hood, stuffed my wetsuit full of sand, and thrashed me with what felt like actual malice. I had no idea which way was up, which was a problem because I ran out of air almost immediately. Ordinarily, the hydraulics of even a large wave dissipate in a few seconds, but this was different. It went on and on. The wave wanted me and was going to keep thrashing me in the darkness until I finally gave up and breathed in. What amazed me was how malevolent the whole thing seemed. Me? Why do you want me? I was young and had no idea the world killed people so casually. Oddly, I remembered that there was a pile of dirty dishes in my sink that someone was going to have to deal with, files and notes for a book I hoped to write on my desk, work clothes scattered across the floor. My parents lived 100 miles away, and I was essentially camping out in their summer house to write my book. It had no insulation, and the baseboard heaters were so wasteful and expensive that I almost never used them. I lived in quilted canvas work clothes and slept in a wool hat and sweater. On very cold nights, my drinking water froze. Virtually nothing bothered me. And now all of that seemed to be over. As I slammed back and forth in the cement mixer hydraulics, I realized that my vision, a circle of gray light where I'd have been looking if my eyes were open, was starting to close down. Meanwhile, I could feel my throat starting to gag, which I knew would culminate in one last forced breath. I'd never come close to drowning before, but somehow my body knew everything. It knew what all the signs meant, what it would be forced to do, and how this would end. The circle of light was down to a pinprick, and the gagging in my throat was almost beyond countering. My thoughts had degenerated into a desperate, "No, no, no!" And then I felt the awful hydraulics slacken, not by much, but enough to sense the buoyancy of my wetsuit. That way was up. If I could hold on a little longer, I'd survive. The wetsuit was rising. I gave a few kicks. I rose more. The world started to get lighter. Everything was turning green. Everything was turning white. I was in the foam. I was in the air. I was in the world. And then I saw one more wave coming, just as big, just as malevolent. I breathed out, breathed in, and went back down. When I was in my late 20s, I worked as a climber for tree companies. It was well paid, but I was told that if I did it for any length of time, I'd get hurt, which I did. I'd hang a line 50 feet into a tree or spike the trunk with climbing irons and take the tree down in sections with a chainsaw. Often limbs or sections of trunk had to be rigged and lowered so that they didn't damage the house or whatever was below. I could take a tree down in its own circumference. I could section out and lower every piece of a 100-foot white pine so that it barely dented the lawn. I was terrified of heights, but learned how to not look down. I just concentrated on what was in front of me and made sure my knots were tied. I was scared of falling, but never of the chainsaws, until I cut myself across the Achilles tendon while up in a medium-sized elm. After that, I wasn't scared of chainsaws exactly, but I was a whole lot more careful with them. I used a braided nylon line that tested at 6,000 pounds. To hold myself in place so that I could work, I used a knot called a climber's hitch that slid up and down but locked as soon as I loosened my grip. The carabiners were rated at around the same strength as the rope. Mighty forces, in other words, were at work keeping me alive 80 feet in the air with a running chainsaw. The existential charm of tree work is that your fate is entirely in your hands. The stakes are high, your life. But as with chess, there are no random events. All the information you need to survive is right in front of you. And if you don't, it's because you made a mistake.